Next, we have our automatic processor. This is what it looks like. And this is something that you are definitely going to have to learn how to use. We still have to teach conventional and automatic processing only because there are still a handful of offices that still do it this way. So if you happen to get into an office where you're doing conventional or analog film, you're going to have to learn how to use your automatic processor. So this is something that you will be doing within your lab. Also, you'll be doing digital and Scanix as well. But what you'll find with the processor, it's going to look very similar to this. There's going to be one major difference from the one that I'm showing you to the one that you're actually going to be using. Because we're processing our films just like with the manual or the hand dipping, we have to make sure that we have some sort of a safe light that we're using. And typically this would be done in a dark room where we would have a safe light, which would be like our red light, that allows for the processing of x-rays and films, and it's not allowing the regular light to kind of come through and ruin our films. So what you'll be using in the clinic is the automatic processor with a daylight loader attached to it. So what that daylight loader does is it basically takes the place of the dark room. So just like we saw with our automatic processor, you're able to process films by looking through that little window, and it's protecting your film. So that's, again, something you might encounter is either doing it in an actual dark room or using a daylight loader. So kind of going over the different components with our automatic processor. This is something you'll have to learn how to use. Just like with our manual processing, we had fixer and developer. We have the same thing with our automatic processing as well. These are the two chemicals that we're going to be using. So we have to make sure, again, that when we're using any type of a chemical, which we use a lot of chemicals in dentistry, you have to make sure that you are wearing and following a proper infection control protocol. Again, you are working and dealing with chemicals, so we want to make sure that you are being safe. So when you're first getting your machine set up, you are going to have basically these tubes here, these caps, and they're going to have to be put into the appropriate container. And they're going to be color-coded. So what you'll notice from your automatic processor is everything's going to be color-coded. So always remember that your developer is going to be connected and has black on it. Your fixer is going to have the red. And what's nice about these, this one doesn't have it, but the other one did, where it said developer on there. So it's kind of a foolproof way so that you're not getting these mixed up. You never want to place your developer cap into your fixer and vice versa, because then you're cross-contaminating. But when you're also ruining the strength and what's happening with the chemical. So that could have a different type of chemical reaction because you're mixing the two. So always make sure you're paying attention to what you're doing. So once you're getting ready to set that up, you open up your bottles and you place the caps on the appropriate bottles, and you get those ready to go. You hook up everything from the back, same thing. We have our drains here. The white one is going to be for our water. We have the red, which is going to be our fixer, and the black, which is going to be our developer. Typically, in a regular setup with a dark room, these are going to be connected to different definitely for the developer, it's going to be connected to a kind of a container that's going to hold the chemical, because what happens is we're going to either have to we're going to have to maintain our machines, so we're going to have to clean up periodically. We're going to have to drain them because the solution does get old. We can't continue to run the same solution. So we do have to periodically do maintenance on these to make sure that it's going to function and work properly. So developer can go down the drain. So this is something that you could either have draining into an empty bottle or draining directly into your sink. However, the fixer has to be disposed of properly. So that's something that would be going into its own container. And that's something that when it's done and you're done, you're ready to dispose of it, you're going to have a company come out and dispose of that properly. Again, these are chemicals, so There's different types of properties within these chemicals that are going to make them a little bit more hazardous to the environment. And Fixer is definitely one of those chemicals. So we never want to put Fixer down the drain because that can get into the water systems, that can get and it can just cause a lot of major issues. So making sure that you're disposing of things correctly is always a good thing. So once you get it all ready and connected and ready to go, the next thing you want to do is to make sure that let me put this down here for a minute. We need to make sure that we are, turn it that way here. We're opening it up and now looking at the components to our automatic processor. So there's the lid. We just kind of remove that. Make sure that when you are cleaning this or doing maintenance to this machine that you put the lid in an area where it can't fall and break. These machines are very pricey, and I'm not really sure honestly if they're really making them much anymore. So to find replacement parts is going to be very, very difficult. So here you can see we have a series of rollers, also known as film transports, and kind of looking at each of the components here. Starting at the beginning, we have our feeder slot, and this is where we're going to be placing our films when we're getting ready to process them. And you notice that they have different slots here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The whole idea around that is when you are processing, especially a full mouth x-ray or full mouth series, that because you have several films that you're processing at one time, you want to alternate which slots you're placing them into. It's always best to start at the slot that's closest to the end. So we always do 1, 3, and 5. Then we come back and then we do our 2, 4, and 6, and then we keep alternating back and forth until we put all of our film in there. The purpose behind that is if you were to place each of these right next to each other, as they start to go through the rollers and they're going through, there's a chance that they could overlap, which can then ruin your film. So you would have to retake all of those x-rays where that would have occurred or would have happened. So we want to stagger or alternate slots to ensure that they're going to go through the roller transport appropriately and then come out the way that they should. So just like we had the black and the red to symbolize our developer and fixer, we have the same thing for our rollers. So when we do take this apart and clean this, we have to make sure again that we're putting the correct rollers in the appropriate tanks. So what you're going to do when you remove these tanks is there's a little latch off to the side here. This one happens to be broken. And you just pull these transporters or these rollers out. So when you're getting ready to use this, and I'm not taking this one out, it's a much bigger tank, and this is what's going to hold the water. So unlike our manual processing where we did developer water, fixer water, this goes from developer to fixer to water, and then it dries. It automatically dries it. So these right here are considered our plugs, and I may or may not be able to get this out. It's pretty corroded. But this is what we're going to remove when we want to clean our machine and do our maintenance to it, because we want to make sure that we are draining all of that solution out of there so we can clean this appropriately. Well, we also have to make sure that when we are getting ready to use our machine again, that we make sure that these are tight, because this is what's going to prevent that chemical from leaking out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to fill each of these tanks with the appropriate chemical. So as you can see inside, they're also color coded. So always pay attention, because if we get these mixed up, there's a good chance that the next person coming in to clean it or to maintain it or to refill it might get mixed up, because they're maybe used to looking at the plugs rather than looking inside. So always make sure you're putting things back the way it's supposed to be. So we're putting our chemical, our developer in here, and we always want to make sure that we are not splashing, because we never want to get any of the developer into the fixer. We never want to get the fixer into the developer, okay? So that can cause a lot of issues and problems when we're starting to process our film. So you do have to be very careful when you're replenishing or filling up these tanks to not splash one into the other. So as you fill these up, you place your developer here, your fixer here, and then this one, let's see if I can get this out. This one's kind of heavy here. Sorry, got my hand in the way. And see if we can pull this out. Yeah, this definitely takes more with two hands, and I'm trying to hold the phone and record, so I'm not going to be able to take this out. But you can kind of see how big this tank is. Then it's going to basically come through down the bottom. It's going to come down there, and then it's going to flip back this way. And this is when the drying is going to begin, once it starts to come up here, and it's going to roll all the way, and then it's going to pop out right up here. And I'm going to show you that here in a minute when I place the lid back on there. So this is what the components to our automatic film processor looks like. So then when we place these back, we always want to make sure we lock them in place. We then take our correct film transports, our rollers, placing them back. This is the fixer, we know, because it's red. We would lock that in if there was one there. And same thing, place our developer back in there, lock it in place. If you are unable to lock them in place, that means that they're not sitting in there appropriately, so you may have to kind of wiggle them a bit to make sure they're in there correctly. But always making sure that if they are filled with your developer and fixer, that you're being careful when you're placing the rollers in there. Again, not to splash any of those chemicals into each of the tanks. So once you have that in there, you're good to go. You can place the lid back on and go ahead and turn your machine on. So I'm going to set this down here for a minute. Okay, so it's back together. We have the lid on. We would then turn it on up here. And then we're looking up here to see what our temperature is going to be. This will automatically, as long as it's working correctly, it's going to keep it at a steady temperature. And we always want to make sure that we're looking at that. Always want to make sure that we're looking at our rollers or inside to make sure that there's enough of the chemicals in there. If you find out that your x-rays are coming out kind of light or a little too dark, then you might always just go in there and check your levels or your solutions to make sure that they're at the appropriate levels where they need to be. And you might also find that on occasion, that especially once it's, once it gets close to it being due for maintenance, you might notice that you might start getting films lost in your machine. So that's something that you're going to have to try to take apart and try to locate where those films are located at and remove them. Hopefully they're far enough in that they are maybe just wet, that they need to be dried, and they're not further in the developing or the fixing state where you're probably going to have to redo your x-ray. So those are kind of the challenges that come about doing automatic processing. There's definitely a lot more room for error. But as we can see, we can do different times, always looking for our temperature. This is going to show up red. It's going to light up red to let us know it's ready. Once it reaches the appropriate temperature, it will show up with the red light, letting us know it's ready to go. I think it's red, or it might be green. It's been a while since I've used this. But it's going to take a while for it to reach the appropriate temperature. So you always make sure, if you are still using automatic processing, that this is something that gets turned on right away in the morning, so when you get to the office. But we have different types of speeds here. And normally what we would do is we'd keep it on the normal speed. when we do films through, this is what we're going to be using. Endo speed, this is meant for, yes, for endodontics or when we're doing root canals. It actually kind of speeds up the process a little bit more. But we never want to use that on just an FMX that we're doing, because it's not a good quality of x-ray because it's speeding it through. And cleaning mode, we've never used cleaning mode. This is something that we did manually. And then if we need to set the temperature, that's where you're going to do that. But everything should automatically be set for you. When you are processing x-rays, if you go into the darkroom and you find that you don't know if somebody had just put films through, this is always going to blink to let you know that it is processing. So just some things to kind of look out for and pay attention to when you are in your lab class and you do begin to start processing films, what that's going to look like. Again, here is always some operating instructions, so just always pay attention to any type of a new machine that you're going to be using or operating, just to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So like I mentioned, once it's going through the drying cycle, which is right here, once it starts coming back into those rollers, it's then going to dispense them right here, and they're going to collect in this area right here. So this is something that once they're done, you would come and grab your films, take them, and then get them mounted. So this is both automatic and manual processing. So have fun with this. It's hopefully, like I mentioned, this will be the last time now that you're in school that you will ever have to use this machine.